Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Rambo the video game for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. This review is coming to you courtesy of El Muchacho Pigo, who sent me this, so I'm not really sure whether to thank or to send a posse after you at this point, but let's just go with thanking because I do appreciate the gesture anyway. This is a rail shooter developed by Taeon and published by Reef Entertainment Limited that was released in February of 2014 to an incredibly negative reception. About the best score you saw for it in one particular review was GameSpot's review, where they said it was a fun, simple rail shooter and gave it a 6 out of 10. Which I can't say is surprising, because, well, let's face it, it's GameSpot. But anyway, let's go ahead and delve into this thing and find out exactly why people seem to hate it so much. And more importantly, whether or not that hatred is actually well-deserved, or if it's very unjust. Well, as far as presentation goes, I mean, just look at this. It looks like something that would have come out on the original Xbox, let alone in 2014. It looks horrible! Very low-res textures, absolutely horrible modeling, incredibly bad animations, and it looks like everything is either made of plastic or clay, and that's not a good thing. And on top of the really crappy visuals, you also have a ludicrous amount of pop-in. I mean, just look at this. There's so many things popping in. The explosions also look terrible. The particle effects are just awful. And there's just random moments that drop the frame rate a few frames, and I can't even remotely figure out why. I mean, you might expect the frame rate to drop during intense action sequences, but it actually ends up dropping more often in areas where there's not much going on, which doesn't make any sense at all. It's not enough to render the game unplayable, but it is mildly annoying. But things get worse when you move into the sound design, because you have sound effects that are generally pretty wimpy and don't sound anywhere near as beefy as they should for a friggin' Rambo game. You have the same handful of music loops that only last about 10 to 20 seconds and loop over and over and over again, so I really hope you like hearing that da 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 tune over and over and over again, because it loops and it gets really annoying after a while. But the absolute best or worst part of it, depending on how you view this, is the use of the original sound files from the movies. And by actually using the sound clips from the movies, I mean they basically just got what appears to be a VHS copy of the movies and recorded the sound from that. At least that's the audio quality level. It is horrible. I mean, just listen to this! As you can see, the audio quality is utterly fantastic, and by utterly fantastic, I really mean it's downright terrible. But of course, what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this is told in the past tense, where it's basically recounting the events of the films First Blood, Rambo First Blood Part 2, and Rambo 3. They didn't include the newest Rambo film in that for some reason, but the classic films are all represented here. And if you've seen those movies, then you've seen the entirety of the plot to this game, so there's really not much to speak of there. Basically, if you're somehow not familiar with Rambo, he is a Vietnam veteran who, in the original First Blood, comes back from the war only to find that the world around him is very inhospitable towards him. And he ultimately ends up having to use his Green Beret skills in order to outwit and deal with a rather corrupt sheriff and his police force. Which in the context of the game doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because in the movie he didn't kill anyone, at least not directly. The only kill that was in the entire movie basically was an accident. But the game pretty much disregards that because it's a rail shooter, and they decide that the entirety of First Blood needs to be done in rail shooter format, so you actually get bonus points for only disabling them rather than just mowing them down like you do with everyone else. But bonus points are the only thing that happens. This outcome is the same regardless, and the only thing you get by actually taking the time to only aim for the legs or the arms or something like that is yay bonus points. It could be worse though. When you do get to the parts where POWs are involved, you have to protect them, and if they get hit once or any of them die, then you instantly fail and you have to start from the last checkpoint. But anyway, that's the only segment of the game that actually has any sort of bonus points for simply disabling enemies rather than outright killing them. And once you get past that segment, you're probably just going to go for headshots all the time, because there's a perk that you can get that will actually regenerate your health on every single headshot. So of course you're going to get that, right? But I digress. Once you get past First Blood, you end up in First Blood Part 2, or just Rambo 2 as most people call it, where Rambo is basically called back into service in order to scout out a POW camp in Vietnam. So basically, Rambo takes it upon himself to slaughter as many of the Viet Cong as he possibly can and their Soviet allies, as well as extract the POWs. Once you get past that, you end up in Rambo 3, where Rambo has moved into Afghanistan in order to rescue his mentor Troutman. And once again, here he is fighting the Soviets, so you actually end up fighting the Soviets twice. They just look slightly different between them. And there's really not much to the plot here that isn't in the movie, so I don't really want to spoil too much of those other than give you some pretty general summaries. The first two Rambo movies, at least, if you haven't seen them, are actually well worth watching. Rambo 3 is only worth watching if you really enjoyed the first two. And frankly, you would be much better served by simply watching the films rather than playing the video game, because the video game is just downright awful. There's no way to describe it other than simply awful. It's a rail shooter, which means that you have no movement whatsoever. It all moves on its own, and you basically interact by pointing at things and clicking the mouse, or if you're on a gamepad anyway, using the trigger button. And that's pretty much it. Occasionally they will throw Quicktime Event cutscenes at you, but the entire game is one fairly long cutscene that lasts about 2 to 3 hours depending on how badly you fail at it. Before every single level, you are given a loadout screen where you're basically not really given a choice, because you have to actually unlock all the weapons through playing the game and completing challenges, so you just stick with whatever the game gives you. So it might give you an AK-47, or it might give you an M60, or whatever it may well be, and you're just kinda stuck with that. Although it doesn't really matter, because a headshot instantly kills an enemy unless they're wearing a helmet, in which case it takes two. The first one knocks the helmet off, the second one kills them. There is also an active reloading mechanic where you can hit the reload button at just the right time after you've started the reload in order to get a perfect reload, which will give you a huge increase in ammo for your magazine, and it will also make the reload quicker. If you let the meter run out, then it just does a basic reload. You can also hit a reload key at the right time to get a normal reload as well. Or if you hit the reload key at the wrong time, then you're going to find that it actually jams the gun up, makes you have less ammo in the magazine, and it's going to take longer to reload it. The problem there is that if you're not happy with the reload you did, you can just keep reloading, because the game just lets you keep doing that, and it's actually kind of silly when you start to think about it. In addition to that, you also get a limited number of grenades that you can use that will wipe out a large portion of the screen all at once. So obviously you're going to reserve that for particularly powerful enemies, or if you're just completely overwhelmed. The only other interaction you get during the rail shooter sequences is the so-called Wrath mode, where the screen turns basically orange and yellow, and you hear Rambo start screaming, and then you can start shooting enemies to replenish your health. And if you don't have that perk that allows you to regenerate your health on every single headshot, then that's going to be your only way of healing throughout the game. And if you're playing on the hardest difficulty setting, which is the only difficulty setting that actually poses a challenge, then you're going to find that that actually gets incredibly annoying. You see, on any difficulty lower than the hardest setting, the enemies basically can't hit the broadside of a barn, you pretty much never die, and it's incredibly easy to deal with everything the game throws at you. On the absolute hardest setting, it actually exposes just how broken the damage system is, because you will actually take damage when nothing is happening at all. Seriously, watch this clip and notice when the damage from this guy actually registers. You will see that it's when he's not actually shooting at me. As you can see, it is spotty at best, and it just ends up being what is politely described as bullshit. Similarly bullshit are the Quicktime Events in this game, which range from stealth, yes, Quicktime Event stealth, which is hilariously bad, to Quicktime Event brawls, to Quicktime Event dodging rockets, or any number of things like that. And what's really funny about that is that there's actually a perk available, and it's unlocked really early in the game, that makes it impossible to fail the Quicktime Events. which of course you're going to use because the Quicktime Events are pretty annoying, and when you actually have a perk like that, what's the point of including the Quicktime Events in the first place? There isn't one. And honestly, that's pretty much it. This game is nothing but running around on rails shooting stuff, or just sitting there through a Quicktime event because you put on the perk that makes you never fail them, or you just hit the button at the right time anyway because it's pretty easy. And very, very occasionally they will throw something at you that seems like it could be cool, but when you really get into the meat of it, it ends up being just more of the same. Like when you get access to the helicopters. That seems like it could be cool, only it's the exact same thing you've been doing for the past, say, hour or so. Which makes it either boring or irritating depending on what your difficulty level is and how badly you fail at actually shooting things, because you actually have to lead your targets during the helicopter segments. It's actually really annoying to have to deal with that because it's really spotty on the hit detection sometimes. My personal favorite is when you try to go for a bow shot and it doesn't register your shot as going to the right location, so instead of getting what should be a headshot, it misses entirely, or it just hits the body. And then if it misses entirely, you instantly die and have to restart from the last checkpoint, which is ridiculous. So what you ultimately get with Rambo the video game is barely even a video game at all. It's basically a 2-hour interactive cutscene, and it's ridiculously boring when it isn't outright infuriating. Luckily, they seem to have patched out the severe technical problems the game had on its launch, but it doesn't really make it too much better. Sure, it runs better now, and you now have the Baker Team DLC, which was released for free, so there's more content than there was at launch, but at the same time, why should you ever care? As I mentioned, the game is just a terrible experience. When it isn't outright boring, it's downright infuriating. It's a cheap, very poorly assembled mess that was just made to cash in on the license way after the license was really relevant. And if you're a fan of Rambo, it's downright insulting. So what ends up happening here is that the game is propelled beyond simply being a bad game. It's a terrible game. There is absolutely no reason for you to ever play Rambo the video game. You can't even really make fun of it. It's not a funny kind of bad. It's just the depressing and irritating kind of bad. And the complete lack of redeeming qualities, coupled with the fact that this was released in 2014 and feels like a game that was released at least a decade earlier than that, really more than a decade earlier than that, makes it a completely impossible to recommend title. But again, at least they seem to have patched out the game-breaking bugs. That's not saying much, but at least it's something, right? It's enough to bring it up from a 0.5 to a 1 out of 5 at least. Thanks for watching.